Block 1. Picasso arrives Rome. In the winter of 1917, the world was a canvas of gray, scarred by the relentless machinery of the Great War. Paris, the once glittering epicenter of the avant-garde, was a city holding its breath, its vibrant artistic pulse muted by the distant thrum of artillery and the ever-present reality of loss. It was from this somber, war-weary capital that a 35-year-old Pablo Picasso, already a figure of seismic importance in the art world, packed his bags. He was not fleeing, nor was he embarking on a grand tour for leisure. He was heading to work. His destination, Rome. The purpose? A collaboration that would inadvertently change the trajectory of his entire artistic life. He was summoned by the impresario Sergei Diaghilev to design the sets and costumes for a revolutionary new production by the Ballets Russes, a ballet provocatively titled Parade. This journey was more than a change of scenery. It was a passage from a world of stark, fragmented modernity into the very heart of antiquity, a collision course between the new and the eternal. Imagine Picasso on that train, rattling south through a fractured Europe. He was the undisputed king of Cubism, the man who had, alongside Georges Braque, shattered the centuries-old window of Renaissance perspective. He had taken reality, disassembled it into geometric planes, and reassembled it from multiple viewpoints at once. His work was a radical, intellectual, and often jarring reflection of a modern, mechanized, and dislocated world. His most famous Cubist works, like Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and portraits of Ambroise Vollard, were seen by the establishment as an assault on beauty, an anarchic destruction of form. He was the ultimate iconoclast, the quintessential modernist rebel. And now, this rebel was heading to the cradle of the very traditions he seemed so determined to overthrow. Rome, the eternal city, was the ultimate museum, a sprawling monument to classical order, anatomical perfection, and the divine harmony of the High Renaissance. It was the home of Michelangelo, Raphael, and Bernini. On the surface, there could be no two worlds more diametrically opposed than Picasso's fractured Parisian studio and the sun-drenched, history-laden piazzas of Rome. His collaborators on this journey were a constellation of the avant-garde. The ballet Parade was the brainchild of the poet and artist Jean Cocteau, with music by the eccentric composer Erik Satie and choreography by the young prodigy Léonide Massine. It was a project designed to shock and provoke. The concept was a Cubist spectacle set outside a sideshow tent, featuring characters like a Chinese conjurer, an American girl, and acrobats, all managed by larger-than-life 10-foot-tall Cubist figures known as the managers. Picasso's job was to bring this bizarre vision to life, to create a three-dimensional Cubist world on stage. He was in his element, tasked with pushing the boundaries of theater design. Yet, the city he was to do this work in was a living, breathing contradiction to the entire aesthetic of the project. As he stepped off the train at Rome's Termini station in February 1917, the contrast must have been overwhelming. He left behind a Paris of rationing and blackout curtains for a Rome bustling with life, a city seemingly untouched by the war's darkest shadows. The air was different, filled not with tension, but with the scent of pine, espresso, and ancient stone. The light was golden, casting long, dramatic shadows that sculpted the city's Baroque facades and classical ruins into forms both familiar and strange. This wasn't just a professional trip, it was a profound cultural immersion. Picasso, ever the voracious observer, began to absorb everything. He was housed near the Villa Medici, with a studio on Via Margutta, the artist's street. From there, he explored. He walked through the Roman Forum, not as a tourist ticking off a checklist, but as an artist dissecting the anatomy of a fallen empire. He saw the Colosseum not just a ruin, but as a monumental study in volume and mass, its arches creating a rhythm of solid and void that perhaps echoed his own artistic explorations. He visited the Vatican and stood beneath the titanic figures of Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. Here was a master who had wrestled with the human form on an epic scale, imbuing it with a weight, power, and physicality that was almost overwhelming. He saw the serene, perfectly balanced compositions of Raphael in the Vatican stanze, the pinnacle of classical harmony. He was confronting, face-to-face, the Goliaths of Western art. His initial reaction wasn't one of conversion, but of intense, analytical curiosity. He wasn't there to bow down, but to understand the source of their power. This initial period in Rome was a whirlwind of sensory and intellectual input, a collision of his own revolutionary ideas with the immense gravitational pull of history. The city was speaking to him in a language of form, line, and legacy, and the great Pablo Picasso, the stranger in this ancient land, was beginning to listen. The stranger's gaze. In the vibrant insular art circles of Rome, Pablo Picasso was an enigma, an alien presence. He was lo straniero, the stranger. This wasn't just a label for a foreigner, it was a descriptor for his entire artistic identity. To the Italian artists, many of whom were themselves grappling with their nation's immense artistic heritage, Picasso's Cubism was a bizarre and aggressive import from the North. It was seen as a cold, cerebral, and fundamentally anti-humanist art form. How could the man who shattered the human face into a collection of geometric shards possibly find common ground in the city that celebrated the perfection of the human form above all else? This perception of him as a radical outsider created a fascinating tension. He was not immediately welcomed into the fold. Instead, he observed from the periphery, his gaze sharp and analytical, turning the city and its treasures into his personal laboratory. This very distance, this status as the stranger, allowed him to see Rome not as an Italian would, burdened by the weight of patrimony, but as a modernist, free to plunder its visual language for his own revolutionary purposes. This period sparked a profound and visible dialogue in his work, a conversation between his hand and the art he was witnessing. The evidence is right there in his sketchbooks. His sketchbooks from this Roman period are a revelation. Alongside preliminary designs for the angular, deconstructed costumes of parade, a completely different style begins to emerge. We see page after page of exquisitely rendered, classical drawings. He sketched the sculptures in the city's museums with a delicate, precise line, reminiscent of the 19th century master Ingres. He drew portraits of his companions, Cocteau, Satie, and the dancer Leonide Massine, not as fragmented Cubist puzzles, but as solid, recognizable figures, grounded in reality. There is a newfound sense of volume and a clear, confident contour line that had been absent from his work for nearly a decade. This wasn't a rejection of Cubism, it was an expansion. He was re-engaging with traditional representation, not out of nostalgic retreat, but as an act of artistic investigation. He was dissecting the classical form just as he had dissected a guitar or a human face, but this time he was using the scalpel of a clean, classical line. His explorations took him beyond the city limits, to Naples, and crucially, to the excavated ruins of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Here, the connection to the ancient world became even more direct and visceral. He wasn't looking at Renaissance interpretations of antiquity, he was looking at antiquity itself. The frescoes of Pompeii, with their linear grace, flattened perspective, and mythological themes, had a profound impact. He saw an art that was at once decorative, humanistic, and strikingly modern in its simplicity. These ancient Roman painters were not slaves to perfect perspective. They used line and color to create elegant narrative compositions. This resonated with Picasso's own modernist sensibilities. It was a historical precedent for prioritizing artistic expression over slavish imitation of reality. He was discovering that the rules he had been breaking had already been bent and reinterpreted 2,000 years earlier. This realization was liberating. It validated his own journey, suggesting that the dialogue between representation and abstraction, between order and freedom, was as old as art itself. This artistic evolution was mirrored by a profound personal one. It was in Rome that he met and fell in love with Olga Kokovla, a ballerina with the Ballets Russes. Olga, with her classical poise and elegant beauty, represented a world far removed from the bohemian chaos of his Montmartre life. His portraits of her from this period are among the most tender and naturalistic he had ever painted. His love for her and his immersion in the classical world became intertwined. Drawing Olga became another way of exploring the classical line, of rediscovering the grace and structure of the human form. This personal connection grounded his artistic shift, giving it an emotional depth. The stranger was not just observing Rome, he was living in it, loving in it, and allowing its spirit to seep into his heart and, consequently, his art. The city wasn't converting him, it was challenging him. It was forcing the most radical artist of the 20th century to confront the foundations of Western art, and in doing so, to confront the foundations of his own genius. The result was not a surrender, but a synthesis, the beginning of a new chapter that would surprise his followers and critics alike, a phase that would later be known as his Neoclassical period. Block 3. Roman Echoes. Cubism. When Picasso returned to Paris in the spring of 1917, he was a changed man, and his art was irrefutable proof. The echoes of Rome, of its monumental sculptures and Renaissance frescoes, did not fade. They resonated with increasing clarity in his work for the next several years. This wasn't a case of artistic amnesia where he simply forgot about Cubism. Instead, what emerged was a masterful and often startling synthesis. Picasso began to operate in a dual-language mode, sometimes creating purely Cubist works on one day and exquisitely classical drawings on the next. More profoundly, he began to fuse the two, creating a powerful new style. He imbued his figures with a sense of classical weight and monumentality, but often rendered them with the subtle distortions and simplified planes learned from Cubism. His post-Roman figures are giants, goddesses, and mothers who possess the gravitas of ancient statuary. They are heavy, solid, and occupy their space with an unshakable presence. This newfound classicism was not a retreat into the past, but a strategic appropriation of its power. He had seen firsthand how the masters of Rome and the Renaissance had used form and scale to convey timelessness and authority, and now he was adding that formidable weapon to his own modernist arsenal. Consider a work like The Pipes of Pan from 1923. The figures are rendered with anatomical clarity and a sculptural quality that is undeniably classical. They could be figures from a Pompeian fresco sunning themselves on a Mediterranean shore. The setting is timeless, the mood is one of idyllic, pastoral calm. This is a world away from the fractured, chaotic energy of his pre-war Cubist paintings. Yet, look closer. There's a subtle awkwardness in the poses, a simplification of the background, and a stark, almost harsh quality to the light that feels distinctly modern. It is classicism filtered through a Cubist sensibility. Or look at his many portraits of his wife, Olga, in an Ingres-like style. The clean, precise contour line and serene composition are a direct homage to the French neoclassical master he had long admired, but his engagement was revitalized by his direct contact with the Roman sources. He was demonstrating an incredible artistic adaptability, proving that his genius was not confined to a single style. He could be both the great destroyer and the great synthesizer. This Roman sojourn and the subsequent neoclassical period had a profound effect on the broader art world. In the aftermath of World War I, there was a widespread cultural movement known as the Return to Order, or Rappel à l'Ordre. Artists and intellectuals reeling from the chaos and destruction of the war sought a return to more traditional values of clarity, stability, and harmony. Picasso, by re-engaging with classicism, became the unwitting standard-bearer for this movement. If the most radical artist alive could find value and inspiration in the classical tradition, it gave permission for others to do the same. It showed that the avant-garde did not have to be a permanent state of revolution against the past. It could, in fact, engage in a productive dialogue with it. The stranger who had arrived in Rome as a seeming barbarian had returned to Paris as a new kind of classicist, reshaping the conversation about what it meant to be a modern artist. He proved that to be modern did not mean you had to erase history. It meant you had to be strong enough to confront it, learn from it, and ultimately bend it to your own will. So, did Rome tame the wild Picasso? The answer is a definitive no. Rome did something far more interesting. It expanded him. It did not blunt his revolutionary edge, it sharpened it by giving it new facets. The journey that began as a work trip for the Ballets Russes became a pivotal moment of artistic discovery. It demonstrated that even the most forward-looking artist is part of a long, unbroken chain of history. The stranger, Lo Straniero, did not become a Roman. Instead, he took a piece of Rome with him, absorbing its lessons of monumentality, line, and humanism, and integrating them into his own ever-evolving vision. The trip was a quiet catalyst, a subtle but powerful force that pushed Picasso's art into a new and unexpected territory, proving that sometimes, to take the next great leap forward, an artist must first take a long, hard look back.